Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would have just some random thoughts on cambered bars for benching. And we could define that as both a McDonald bar, which is called a cambered bench bar. We could go off of a Buffalo bar, some people call it the Duffalo for Chris Duffin's specific one. But the idea is the same with either bar, is that they put our hands in a deeper position. In other words, it increases the range of motion of a bench press while still keeping the mechanics the same as a bench press, right? And dumbbells are a little bit different, right? They're their own beast. You guys know I really like dumbbells for chest work these days. Prescribe it to a lot of clients. Actually invested like $800 worth of stuff just to have adjustable dumbbells so that I could do them within the last year. So I'm big on those things. But when it comes to these others, I like to dig into the research that's out there, right? It's one thing to say, okay, we can test stuff, we can look at what different coaches do, we could look at what we do with our own clients, but I like to dig into the research. And when I started looking at different studies that are out there on this bar, I found some interesting things. And again, either one of the bars, because sometimes they don't differentiate between these two, right? They're just calling them benching with cambered bars. And they show some interesting things. They show really interesting things relative to a straight bar, just like we know with a straight bar or a power bar or Olympic bar, or whatever term you choose to use. I like to just call it a power bar or straight bar. But we know that even changing rep ranges completely changes the nature of the bench press, right? Something a lot of people are not aware of, right? We know that as your percentage of one rep max goes up, based upon the data that's out there, that pectoral activation goes up, right? Pectoral activation goes up. And interestingly enough, at least one study comparing these things found that long head of the tricep activity went up, right? And it can be very high, which I thought was fascinating, because we look at a lot of the hypertrophy studies and we find lateral head on the bench, right? We always see the lateral head grows the most from the bench press for volume work. The long head really matters a lot when we start getting towards max benching. When we look at activation, right, we start hitting 90% of your max or higher. That long head is really important, and this is based on studies for raw benching. Delts become more important. Pecs get used less, right? They're still a primary mover, but as the reps go down and the percentage of your max goes up, the focus gets shifted, right? More towards delts and long head of the tricep. All right, which again is kind of fascinating because we don't always think of the bench as the best long head exercise. So we have that. And so then I've looked at certain studies that were there on these bars, and they've compared them to a straight bar, a few different studies actually. And they're easy enough to find. You just can find them real easy on Google. People always ask me, why don't you link studies? It's not worth it to me. Not a research paper. I've gotten strikes in the past for it. I had to get overturned for linking studies. So it's not worth the hassle to me. If someone really cares enough, if they're actually going to read a full study, they'll Google to find these studies. So I'm not taking the risk to my channel for it. Sorry, it just is what it is. Some people don't like that. They get upset at that answer. It's too bad. I'm not risking a strike for you guys. And I don't care that another channel gets away with it. I don't seem to be able to. So what they're finding is a few things. Number one, the rate of force production is higher. Okay? When we're using a bent bar of any type with that deeper range of motion, we get a higher rate of force production. That makes sense because we see the same thing on things like the box squat, right? We see the same thing, higher rate of force production. It's because we're going into a deeper stretch, we're into a deeper stretch position, and we have to explode and overcome the static weight from a deeper stretch position. So it makes sense because then we have to move the bar further. So if we're trying to go fast, the rate of force production is higher. I mean, it does make sense. So I really like some of these bars for speed work, right? It's like, okay, I get it. It'd be really useful to use that Buffalo bar for speed work sometimes. Just like we use the box squat, highest rate of force production. But what I thought was more fascinating is that when they started looking at muscle activation for these bars. Now, a lot of times we would look at it and say, oh, it's got to work the pecs more. No, not the case at all. these bars with the longer range of motion reduce chest stimulus when they've been looked at in the studies, and they work more anterior deltoid. The reason for it seems to be that the stretch position that we get relative to the joint angles, whereas, and again, dumbbells, we have a little more leeway to get more pec involved at the bottom. The hypothesis that they've come up with, at least the researchers, is that it seems to stretch the muscle beyond where it's the muscle, and now it's just ligaments, right? So you're the tendons. The tendons are being stretched a little bit further for the pectoral. So then as far as the actual movers outside of the tendon stretch, the anterior deltoids have to work harder to break it out of the bottom. Therefore, the anterior deltoid activity goes up. A little less pec. Also notice a little less long head of the tricep. Which I've noticed too. Remember when I said when I do rep work, a lot of times with that buffalo bar, I feel more medial head of my tricep than I do on a bench, but it seems to use less long head. But the front delts, and it's a statistically significant larger amount of front delt activity and a little less pectoral. So what that means is these bars might be better for getting into that stretch position, right? But what they really are is a front delt exercise. And that a normal straight bar seems to be better for pecs, along with dumbbells seem to be great for pecs too. So what might the role be? If we were to look at this research that we have, we might say, well, someone with a delt weakness, which some coaches, some really good coaches with biomechanics background believe is actually what causes a miss right off the chest. Right? A midway miss is more likely to be pecs. Missing 6 inches off your chest. Missing off the very bottom, like you move it a couple inches and it stops, seems to be possibly delts because of that stretch position on the anterior delt there. I've seen Greg Nuckols write stuff on that in his Science and Strength blog. That's what he believes to be the case. If we were to go off his data, and it puts us into that deeper stretch there where the delts work harder with these bars. Okay. So from a muscular perspective, we might say these bars are interchangeable with our overhead pressing for weak point specialization because of the higher delt activity. Before anyone says, yeah, but the other parts of that, those other parts of that don't get worked enough from overhead pressing to really think about, right? You're not going to get a whole lot of hypertrophy from that because if we use it, see, it gets worked some, well, the benching works the side head some, right? No one thinks of the bench press as the best side delt exercise by any stretch of the imagination, although some experts do. For those unaware, there are some even bodybuilding type guys out there who don't believe in training side delts directly at all or overhead pressing. It's food for thought. I'm not saying I'm in that category because I like the laterals and hang pulls and all those things. I think they have a lot of merit. I'm just pointing that out as a point of contention. I don't agree with it, but it does exist as an argument by some very successful coaches, even physique coaches. Okay. But the front delt, well, incidentally, it still makes sense if we're weak right off the chest to use these bars. Whether we want to argue if that's pec or delt or not would be irrelevant for the context of these bars. But the point being, these bars become very useful for the same purposes in which we might use an overhead press for improving the bench. Arguably shoulder safer, although again, taken to the extremes, these can cause shoulder injuries too if you're not careful. Right? And then if pecs themselves are a problem, benching, illegal wide benching, dumbbells, floor presses if you're thicker, can still handle that quite well. Right? Just some thoughts I've had based on the research. Take it or leave it. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.